It's been more than a year since we last spoke, and I'm curious, how much more serious do you believe the threats, the cyber threats on America are today than they were a year ago?
I think the threats have grown significantly and will continue to grow. When you think about all that's going on, the number of devices that are connecting to the network, how we're becoming increasingly more digitized, the impact to our nation for cybersecurity is growing and is becoming the top threat that we face as a country.
So what about from Russia specifically? When you were head of the NSA, the agency saw Russia use real cyber weapons for the first time, right? And this was in a military conflict in Georgia. How would you say cyber threats from Russia have evolved since then?
I haven't been gone for 3 years. I'm not read into the specifics, but I think every nation, including Russia, is evolving their cyber capabilities. What you are seeing in 2008, when we created Cyber Command, the outcome of that was from Buckshot Yankee, and the assistant or the deputy secretary of defense, Lynn, identified Russia as the one that had gotten into that network. So you've seen Russia continuously go after both Defense Department, government, and other infrastructure. And what you're really seeing is nations are using cybersecurity as an element of national power. You would expect that. And so what that really puts on the table is how do we now create a defensive architecture across the board for our country? So
when it comes to Russia, have you been surprised by just how blatant the hacking has been, how in your face it has been, especially when it comes to the U.S. presidential election?
Well, I think what it points out is not just that it's blatant, but that we're not prepared to defend. So if you left a bag of money on a park bench and then you're surprised that somebody stole it, you'd say, well, secure your money. And where I think that gets us to is secure your network. We shouldn't be pummeled with these. We've got to make these changes in cybersecurity. And it's important to point out that it can't be done by industry itself. It has to be an industry-government partnership. And I think, I think this is an area that the Trump administration has taken on. And I think it's important that government and industry work together for a defensive architecture that can block these kinds of things in the future. So actually, whether they're blatant or not, we shouldn't be faced with them. We shouldn't have people that are losing intellectual property to low-profile hackers and things like we're seeing.
So what's your impression of whether or not the Trump administration is really taking these threats seriously enough?
I think on cybersecurity, I've met twice with the president. Both meetings have been great on cybersecurity. He's asked all the right questions. He's pointed to his administration officials to help. And his comment to industry and to the government, what do you need from me? Exactly what we'd want him to do. So I think he takes it serious. He understands the threat. He's got Tom Bossert as a lead. He's amazing, and Rob Joyce. And I think what they're doing is trying to put this in the right place. So I am optimistic that the government will move forward. I think we in industry, we need that. There's so much you can do as a cybersecurity company, but for sectors in the nation, it takes the government to weigh in. I think we can get there. Think of it as an air defense network over our country. If we had everybody defending each state with their own air defense system or each company with their own air defense system, that wouldn't be a viable defensive infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do in cybersecurity. So we have to change that.
So we understand you've been advising the administration. What kind of advice are you giving them? What kind of advice have you given to President Trump?
Great advice. It's always been great. Mike, just along those lines. It's been, we have to work together. I think the interesting part is my experience in the financial sector and in the energy sector. They're willing to pay and do what it takes to get them secure to where they can. Great, across the board. CEOs and CISOs have been great to work with. Their cybersecurity team in industry, in the financial sector, energy sector, are weighing in and I think doing great work. Mm-hmm. And so the missing link is when they're being attacked, who do you call? You dial 911. There's no answer to stop the attack as it's ongoing. We have incident response, but we don't have a way to block the attack. So now if you jump forward to the election and the elections are being attacked, who do you call? And the answer is it's always after the fact. Well, you need to have a way of defending it at network speed. And that takes industry and government to work together.
So if President Trump is taking this issue seriously, as you say, then why hasn't he publicly acknowledged Russia's hacking of the election?
Well, I think that's a more strategic question. And so that gets back to, what do you want to do with Russia? And how does the administration work with Russia in the future? Do you poke them in the eye, or do you talk to them quietly on the side? And when I think my way through it, the comments that I would do is to say publicly, I'm not going to make this harder than I need to. How do I privately engage Putin and the Russian government to get to the right place? You know, we don't want to create another Cold War, and we don't want a war. So if that's the outcome we want, we have to have some kind of partnership with Russia. Remember, 40 years in the military, Russia was always the adversary. At the same time, we have to be conscious. So it's like that movie where you're looking up at them, right? But you've got to figure out, in the Middle East and in other areas, how do we work with and not against them? And so I think every administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration, and now the Trump administration, is trying the same thing. If you remember, the Obama administration went in with a reset button. And so I think we've got to give this administration time to work it out. And what that means is, don't poke them in the eye yet.
That said, you've got all the U.S. intelligence agencies saying this happened, and it seems like President Trump is at odds with his own intelligence agencies.
Well, I think really what he's doing is giving himself the ability to deal. And, you know, it comes from, I think, when you're a CEO and you want to have a strategic deal, you let your people do certain sets of things and you leave yourself enough room to negotiate. Now, I don't know specifically on these. I haven't asked on the Russia stuff, so I'm giving you my best thoughts. But my experience in dealing with him on the cybersecurity is he's very thoughtful. I thought he was well-read. He knew all the facts. It wasn't like he was coming up to speed and didn't know it. He had read everything, as you would see a CEO doing it. And I expect on Russia he's doing the same thing. And the question for our country, I think that we've got to ask strategically, is where do we want to be with Russia and China?
So what about China? Let's talk about that.
Well, I think China has some great opportunities too. They're a growing power. They're doing things in the energy sector and around the world. I have said publicly that the greatest transfer of wealth has been their theft of intellectual property. How do we now set this right? This administration has a chance to do both. There are a number of issues that we're going to face with China, the South China Sea, the islands off of Japan, and what about North Korea? And all of those linked together. These aren't easy issues. And it really requires, I think, for the administration, negotiating room. And so I think, as I look at this, the real key is, how do we get our nation to work together as a team to support these strategic goals? And what we see is we're fighting at tactical issues. It's almost like kindergarten, you know, what you see going on. And really what you want is to say, hold it, what does our country need? We need to figure out a strategic relationship with Russia, a strategic relationship with China, set those both right, and then look at how do we deal with North Korea. And I think Secretary Gates' article last week was really good on that. So those are the really big issues. And then you have in the middle cyber and terrorism. And it's really interesting to see how this is playing out. And oh, by the way, you know, Trump was elected to change and to upset Washington. Well, that's happening.
So how concerned are you about the special investigation and about concerns about potential collusion between the campaign and Russia?
Well, from what, you know, I'm not that concerned. Here's why. One, I know Bob Mueller. He is a great person. He will call it like it is. I think, you know, what we're seeing is people sensationalizing and inflaming. And what we really need to do is step back, let Bob Mueller do his job. I think, you know, what you'll find is there were meetings, and yep, all the things that have already been exposed. I think most of those have been meetings that others have had as well. But I'm not worried about that. I think that's where, let Mueller do his job. He's a good person. I think the greatest integrity of any government official I've talked to. So he'll do it right. And I think at the same time, let's step back and say, what should we be doing? You know, this investigation will take several months. Is there other things our country should be doing, or should we all stop? And the answer is, wow, we have Syria. We have all these issues going on. Let's go solve some of those.
Now, when it comes to the cybersecurity technology that you're developing at IronNet, I'm curious how that benefits from, you know, what you learned at the NSA, and how much that technology really draws on, you know, what you learned in the government versus, you know, integrating with the private sector.
Well, I think one of the things that we learned in government is that it takes a team to defend, and we actually use that as well. What we didn't have is the tools to actually build a team to work together. So one of the things that we set out is, well, if nobody else will build them, let's go build those tools. Let's create the tools. And we've done a couple patents. We've actually provided those patents ahead of time to NSA so they could see this is original work, not stuff that was created in government. I think that's important. And now this is where you start to think about, how do we integrate sectors and the nation to work together? Other companies are going to be in there as well. I'd like IronNet to be in the lead, but I'm sure others will be engaged in this as well. So bottom line, if you were to look at how do you defend a bank from thieves, my experience is, okay, I know how to defend from cyber, and it's by working things together. And so there's no magic tools. It's really, if you think about how you defend your house, you're in a neighborhood watch program. If you were the only one and everybody else was saying, geez, I hope Emily's house doesn't get hit with this, no, you want a neighborhood watch program. And we need a neighborhood watch program for cyber. And that's a philosophy that is free. Everybody talks about it, and we're going to try to make that real.